Good morning, good evening, everyone. This is Luda Kopikina from GAI Insights. Welcome to Daily AI News Review, where we rate articles essential, important, and optional, saving you time in your busy day to follow the trends and stay ahead of all this news happening in the busy AI field. So today I have John, Amanda, and a special guest, Ben Faircloth from Sika. Ben, maybe you can introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Yeah. So nice to be here. My name is Ben Faircloth. I am the director of AI solutions at Seeker, where we have a generative AI platform and help customers develop any agentic and/or foundational solutions. And also, I do a lot of enablement internally, just to make sure that we're all understanding the current research and where industry is going.
Wonderful.
Yeah, point out it's great. Explainability as well, across the platform in terms of the models and so forth, which I think continues to be an important issue and growing one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely an area that we tend to focus on a lot. Be a trustworthy AI solution, and the explainability, observability, evaluation, all of that comes intertwined with these complex systems.
Wonderful.
Great.
So thank you. Welcome. And let's proceed to the first article. You can follow along with us as we review the articles, and the links to the articles are on gaiinsights.com/articles. So the first one is about using voice mode on Claude mobile apps. This is a new voice mode introduction from Claude. What did you think about this, Amanda?
Yeah, I think just in general, the development's something that's coming. So, just again, in general, the feature is something to think about, but it was honestly just a product announcement. There was nothing special for me to pull out of here at all. So for me, this one was optional.
John, what did you think?
Yeah, same thing for me. I thought that it's like an announcement on voice. It's not that it's not radically different in terms of other technology that's already out there. Product announcement, no real impact, assessment, so optional.
Okay. Yeah, I actually asked the bot Perplexity to compare the two, OpenAI and this one. Not that it is out there yet, but in terms of features that are being introduced. And it said that that OpenAI is way more established and has more capabilities than this one. So this is, from the perspective of the overall developing field, this is catching up. So that's optional for me as well. Ben,
Luda, just FYI, I use the OpenAI mobile app voice a lot.
Yeah,
it's still, and I was testing this morning. It's the same thing. It captures your voice and then converts it to text as a prompt. So it's very much a catch up.
Yeah, it's a catch up. Ben, what did you think? We're going optional here.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with the consensus here. I think it's definitely optional in the sense that it's interesting for those that are interested in how we are interacting with these voice interfaces, but ultimately there's not a whole lot of limited technical or strategic depth necessarily to the article. It's just one more perspective on that same interface, I would say.
Okay, great. So optional it is. Let's proceed to the next one. This is a survey from Box of 1,300 AI executives that are implementing AI in various verticals. And this is the state of AI in the enterprise, how organizations are staying competitive in the AI-first era of business. John, there's a lot of good information here. What did you think?
Yeah, no question. To me, it's essential. It's a really nicely done report. It goes through a series of really important things in terms of what's happening with productivity, what's happening with workforce design, how, deals with some of the implications competitively for organizations. And then I think an interesting fact, which we've been talking about, and this is supporting data for it, which is that the leaders are moving ahead faster. So the people who are experiencing, higher productivity are adopting more complex agents, more complex models, and are allocating more of their IT budget to AI, and their AI budget's growing faster. So they're doubling down. Now that makes intuitive sense. So if you're getting better results, you're going to put more into it. So in a certain sense, it's just common sense. But it's amazing that you see this, and I think the fact base is pretty good. Ankash, if you go down, and the graphics are nice in terms of 94% of surveyed companies are using AI at various levels of maturity. Something we would expect. If you go down farther, how do you measure success? Lays out, time savings, quality, growth. Growth is less here than we've seen in other studies. Akash, if we go back up to, we look at, let's see, which one are you looking at here? I'm looking for page 6. Revenue growth here is 28%. Time savings and productivity.
This one, right? This one, John. This is me driving.
I'm sorry, I said Akash.
Okay.
We know Akash isn't here. Sorry about that, Luda. Page 6. Look at this thing. So revenue growth is 28% of the reporting companies compared to the other things above. We've often seen other surveys and interviews saying that it's more about revenue growth, but I think this makes a lot of sense to me, that the first 4 of these, look at this: time savings, employee productivity metrics, cost reduction, error reduction. So the first 4 are efficiency and quality. And I think that's an important message, combined with some of the stuff we saw yesterday about the labor market. I think this is going to have a massive impact, and we're going to get to it a little bit later, on labor and jobs and things like that. We're seeing it here. I guess if you go down to page 11, Luda, I think there's another interesting thing here about what kind of cases, and a lot of it is around documents and chat and education. And then I think it's also interesting that the more advanced companies are using more kinds of data. Actually, Ben, there's probably a message for Seeker here in terms of how you do your target marketing and so forth, right? In terms of going after the more sophisticated customers. Anyway, lots here. I won't keep going. I could. Essential reading.
Yeah. So it becomes really clear reading all these snippets of data, that the people who are really focusing on and have been focusing on implementing AI across their enterprises are pulling ahead. They are way ahead in various metrics, implementing, getting value from their applications, assigning more budget because they see the ROI coming in. So it's the main message for me was you can't not do this. Amanda, what did you think?
Yeah, this article is definitely essential for me as well. The one disconnect I did see, though, was about, it said 87% of organizations are using AI agents. So I found that interesting, and I can't see now what page that's on. But what's interesting to me about that is that it's saying that a lot of companies are still experimenting, but yet 87% are at an advanced level. I thought that was a little weird, because if you haven't put out a solution yet, why are you in this advanced phase of AI agent development if you haven't found a basic use case? So I thought that was a little strange. But other than that, this to me is definitely essential reading.
Yeah, so I read it as, see, people are really understanding that the agents is the next hurrah, and they're experimenting with it. So the top ones is the early stage. So they're experimenting with it, but not quite implementing. That's why the number is probably so high. Okay. Ben,
I just want to highlight Amanda's comment. I find that 100% incongruent with what we talk with companies here. 99% of companies, they do not want agents used. They don't have a corporate governance on it. They don't even have a framework for it. So I find it really misleading and actually makes me suspect in other parts of the data, because I think so much of the other report's quite solid.
Yeah, but I think it's an experimentation phase. Ben, what did you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with the sentiment a little bit there. Any of the customers that we tend to work with, a lot of what we do is communicating either the value of agents or potentially when agents are not necessary to support a solution. And so I can see experimentation being a driving factor for that percentage. But in terms of, production grade agents, in our experience, both in federal and commercial space, we're not seeing, whole cloth solutions out there. But overall, I'd say it is an essential article. I think it should be part of any AI leaders reading list. Alluded to your point about, the early adopters, they really matter in this case. And the AI agent gap, we can debate how, what that percentage looks like in terms of utilization. But I think we're seeing like a gap that mirrors early adoption of cloud, and I think laggards are going to pay a steep long-term penalty as a result.
Yes, 70% of respondents believe AI is changing the competitive landscape in their industries, for sure. Yeah, so then I think there is another section about ROIs and agents, but it is, I think, also data security and governance, and the key key pieces of that, what the folks are putting in place is also very insightful. And the advanced folks are putting in place across the board. The structures are put in place across the board. So it's actually a comprehensive set. So let's put it as anything else to add? Let's put it as essential and proceed to the next one. Let's see, what's the next one? Yes, this is coming from Mistral, and this is a coding-specific embedding model. What do you think about this, Amanda?
Yeah, I also thought this one was pretty much just a product announcement. As far as it says like use cases, if you go down a little bit, I mean, high level sentence or two here. So there's not a lot of detail at all for me on that front. So for me, this is very optional.
Okay, going optional here. John, Ben?
I think from my perspective, working with developers pretty closely, I think optional leaning towards important, depending on what your persona or your role is. It's relevant for practitioners. When we talk about, the various embedding models and RAG architectures, it does demonstrate some competitive model performance, details and pricing details that are important for a practitioner. And, one of the things that we're constantly doing is always evaluating alternatives, whether it's OpenAI, Cohere, and it'll help in that means. But again, it's mostly going to be for technical builders. So I'll say, I'd probably say closer to important.
Closer to important.
Yeah.
Okay, John, what did you think? Optional, important?
Yeah, I was going to go optional. I think that the, it's a product announcement, new feature. We really don't know, what the implications are going to be in terms of impact. So I was just going to give it an option.
Paul, going optional, okay?
1000% agree. Triple optional.
Triple optional. Okay, sounds good. Okay, I think I skipped the article. Here's the next one, and this is about how coming from Anderson Horowitz, a VC firm, talking about the topic that we've discussed quite a bit about GEO, generative engine optimization, rewriting the rules of search. So there's quite a bit of interesting insights here. What did you think about this, Ben?
Yeah, so it sounds like you've discussed it quite a lot, so hopefully I won't be repeating anything. But I found it really interesting, actually, and I would say that this is likely going to be an essential read. It hits a nerve in the best ways. It's basically arguing that search engine optimization, as we know it, is getting rewritten for generative AI, and the shift here is that we're moving from optimizing content to be clicked to optimizing content to be quoted. So essentially, if you were a marketer or if you're building a site and the content isn't readable or referenceable by a model, it's almost as if it actually doesn't exist. So structure matters, headings, declarative facts, Q&A formats, all of that is going to be really important. What's important to highlight here is LLMs, they don't crawl like Google. They actually, from a technical perspective, they embed, they summarize, and they quote. So, if a model can't find your content and chunk it and cite it accurately, then that's going to be a big challenge for you.
Paul, you're big on this topic. What did you think?
Yeah, this is absolutely essential here. And it's not just, it's product discovery, product valuations, also employee brand. Every new person now is asking the the answer engines, should I work at Fidelity or not here? So there's a whole another way that potential employers are evaluating your company's culture and everything else. And that's why every CEO needs to be aware of this. Andreessen Horowitz, they do a good job. If you scroll down, they have a, first market map of, I think a couple dozen companies that are helping. Yeah, right here. I mean, we know a lot of these guys, Brand Rank and Brand Light presented, both Brand Rank and Brand Light presented at a learning lab. So definitely essential. The last thing I say essential is that I continue to find, I had 2 more calls this week with CEOs, and neither CEO understood what's going on here. So I think one of the things that's important for the AI leaders is incumbent for them to make sure that their board and marketing people understand this radical change. So essential.
Yeah, it's still early, right? But look at the number of companies going at this, and there are tools that now allow brands to see what's happening with their ads and how they're being, deployed. Amanda, what did you think? Going essential here. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, so my whole thing on this is the sources that are being generated, right? That's kind of what I've been harping on, because it can throw you out a bunch of information is irrelevant. So I searched again recently on my topic, space debris, right? Because I'm consistently seeing, is it still feeding me Wikipedia, this and that? And it is feeding me a decent amount of Wikipedia. But the last time I did it, the third source was the ODPO. So basically through NASA Orbital Debris Office. So that's kind of been my hiccup with this is, yes, we should pay attention. But again, depending on what your search is, if it's something like very simple in Google, fine. But if it's anything of substance, is it still relevant or not? So that's why for me, I guess I'm on the important camp. I'm not quite essential yet, because I still am not totally convinced with the sources consistently yet.
Okay, so we have a question here. You took it out. We have a question from Vivek, whether the term GEO is the term that industry is settling on. Not really. John, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. In terms of this article, absolutely essential. This issue, actually, this shows you what a dull guy I am. Paul and I were going back and forth with Pete Blackshaw last night about, from Brand Rank, who's a dear friend of both of ours. And he was making the impassioned plea for AEO, answer engine optimization. He said, because by putting answer in the acronym, we are focusing on the customer, which is the right way to be, as opposed to the supplier or the supply. And I agree with Pete on that one. But I think to Vivek's question, I don't think we're settled yet, but I bet we'll settle soon. And, these guys have an incredible reach. The thing that there's 2 things that I really think business leaders need to focus on. First, people don't bring up enough the fact that advertising is what is the main source of funding for the internet, for the consumer internet. And this is a complete redirection. It's like taking the Mississippi River and moving it across the Rocky Mountains, right? It's going to take $600 billion of non-linear advertising, Facebook, all that other stuff, and it's going to reroute it, or a big piece of it, over to these answer engines. So this is a huge deal, because it's the main funding source for the consumer internet. And there's that. The other thing, and we don't know yet, I bet we have longitudinal effects. And what I mean by that is the way the weights work over time. You better get on this now, because how those weights are adjusted and where you are in those answer engines is probably going to have to do not only with your current capability, but what your history has been. And so to the issues that Ben was talking about, you better get on that now, because the algorithm's going to take that history. And, just like the early days of LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, if you got on it, you were able to build an audience and have a better presence. I think, I'd be curious, Ben, if you agree. I think, depending upon how the models are built, that we'll have a similar effect here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously all the context matters, right? And so all of that will be retained. But so I totally agree with you.
Yeah,
so this is urgent, not going away, and super important.
See, here we are talking about it. We have been talking about it. And Paul says that in his discussions, people are not aware. Why do you think that, Paul? They're just not following?
Well,
what is happening?
No, I think a few things. I think, we're a bunch of Gen AI enthusiasts here. 99% of the world are just doing their business here. Google's had such a monopoly. This has never been a CEO issue because they had such a monopoly. They pushed it down. And I think third is, unless you've got someone showing you the difference, you don't see it. And I think, John, I really like your analogy of the Mississippi River here, because it's not only the answer engine, then it's going to go to task engine. So the agent activity is going to start coming out of this. Oh, you like this product? Do you want to buy it? Do you like this product? Do you want to set up a demo on? Do you like this product? Do you want a free sample to it? So it has profound implications and given how fast this is moving, and given how B2C is always such a global adopter ahead of B2B, companies do need to be aware here. But yeah, Luda, I think that's one. It's never been a CEO issue. Two, second is we haven't had the scare stories yet. We don't have, a startup that's radically taken 15% of Expedia's business because they have an answer engine optimization thing here. So I think we're 6 to 9 months away from it, but it is coming really fast. And the last thing I'll add is that, Alden in our learning lab is brought up a lot of good points, that the users are spending double the number of minutes in the answer engines or Geo versus the Google stuff here. So not only are you getting a better experience as a user, you're spending more minutes, which also has big implications.
Yes, so essential it is. Let's proceed to the next article. Okay, so we have an article from New Yorker that within 2 paths for AI. For me, it was blocked, so I couldn't read it. John, could you please tell us what it's about and rate it?
All right, I love it. Now I'll have more authoritative voice because no one can really read it. I'm trying to separate, absolutely optional. I'm trying to separate out my particular prejudice for I hate this kind of rhetoric to what's actually in the article. So this is typical, like on the one hand, on the other hand, there's no real analysis. It's just kind of like, could be horrible, could be wonderful. The core thing in this is whether or not recursive self-improvement, RSI, that is the models making themselves better, is going to make the models go out of control. And then that out of controlness will go to a positive end, a neutral end, or a negative end. And they and so there's a researcher who I don't remember his name, the researcher who resigned, Coco Tajlo, who resigned over this from OpenAI because he was saying, and I think he's right, that all the big model companies are going to go to recursive self-improvement one way or another. It might be called something a little different, but that basic idea of giving decision rights to models to make themselves better is going to happen. I do believe that he's right about that. And then the counterpoint of these 2 guys who wrote the book on AI hype, and I've always found their analysis kind of shallow. For example, they're just saying, hey, we'll be able to control it. It's not going to happen as quickly as people think. To me, the real dynamics are much more substantive, which is the military-industrial complex is absolutely committed to AI. There's no stopping that, right? This is an arms race that has just begun. And, the Chinese, the US, the Russians, I mean, everybody, and I think it's going to descale. It's not going to be like nuclear power and nuclear weapons. It's going to descale the attack capability because it doesn't take that much capital once you get access to some of these open source models. So that's a dynamic that's there. I think there's also a competitive dynamic, which is that we're seeing massive changes in labor productivity, quality, output, capacity. So the forces this would be much more interesting to talk about any of the major forces that are pushing this one way or another, rather than simply arguing about, oh, can we control it or not? No, that's not the issue. The issue is in the context of this is coming, what can we do and what should we do? So optional. Sorry to be impassioned about this. I just hate this kind of argument. It's just.
Thanks for that. Amanda, what did you think?
Yeah, for me it was optional, and some of the stranger parts of it where there was a couple points where it talks about the AI taking over, and then I feel like at one point it said that those building it think it's going to happen, which some people still say that, and I'm just like, no way. I think that's crazy. And then in another point, it says that researchers feel that it won't happen because, like, as far as drugs, FDA has to approve and all these different things. So it's a little, it contradicts itself a little bit, I feel like, through some of it as well. So yeah, I'm optional on this one.
Okay. Ben, Ben and Paul, we're going optional. Yes, John, you want to?
I was just going to say, Malcolm Gladwell does the same thing. He does on the one hand, on the other hand, and like contradicts himself, but he does it elegantly and convincingly. This person does it in a ham-handed manner.
So Ben, you're getting a sense for what John was like when he taught at HBS for 12 years. You raise your hand and did one of those, just got ripped.
That was very, very good. Ben and Paul going optional, okay?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have to agree with this. I think, this type of, narrative really paints a false dichotomy, with this idea that either you have path A, doom is near, slow down, stop the presses, or path B where all is fine, keep building, and being naive. And I think it's not this existential showdown. And unfortunately, articles like this, they will shape the narrative for non-experts, folks that are, journalists, politicians, or executives. And a lot of these folks are determining policy, and so money is going to go to places, or, work is going to go to places that may not necessarily be the most value. Most of us are just trying to get models to not hallucinate, not necessarily taking over the world. How we talk about this reminds me a little bit of, and I'm not sure if you talked about it on this program, but there was a model from Anthropic that was quote unquote like behaving badly during some red team testing, and it was pushed to respond in ways like lying, blackmailing, deceiving, and the narrative around that is very much that, oh, hey, these models are doing these things, but when in fact these are indicators of model safety protocols that we have in place where we are testing things properly and then adapting as a result. And so I think that's the type of focus we should be having, not this, again, this false dichotomy, like thinking about what are the things that we can do day to day as practitioners to encourage these models to perform the way we want them to.
Very well said. Good point. But optional, right?
Optional for sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Going optional here. Last one is from AWS, talking about how Rufus, their Amazon AI assistant, on Prime Day was propped to actually be faster and able to do the load that on Prime Day is quite significant. What did you think about this, Ben?
Yeah, and again, I think my technical nerd bias is going to put me towards important on this one, but maybe for some it might be optional. I think it was a really good use case where we show this end-to-end full stack flex to result in optimization. So, with generative AI solutions, generally the bottleneck is going to be around latency, and the biggest latency that people noticed is like a first token delay. And so what they did is they took their architecture, which is made up of Rufus has a query planner and then an LLM. And so first they optimized the query planner. They introduced something called a speculative decoding technique, which is basically using a small draft model that's going to help, to basically help to classify and reroute any of the questions that the users are asking. So maybe I need to do a product search, or maybe I need to just respond with an answer. The real magic is on the LLM side, though, and this is where it gets a little bit more nerdy. And in terms of the LLM architecture, they basically wanted to set it up such that the metaphor I would use is, imagine that you are writing a sentence or a paragraph, and your left hand is writing one word at a time. Now, the way it generally works with generative models is that they're autoregressive. They're always looking at the next token. But what they did is they had an additional attention heads that were basically guessing, what the next 2 or 3 or 4 words might be. And then the main LLM is just going through and determining, is that accurate or is that not? And so what it allows for is a little bit more of a optimization, parallelization of that next token generation. So, I would say that the article overall is really more about getting creative and performance tweaks that are not that are more software related and how we're thinking about these problems, these system thinking, versus there are some points around the AWS Inferentia 2 and some other NVIDIA components, which I believe while those were great facilitators, they're probably more of a marketing focus or product focus in this article. So ultimately, as a nerd, this idea that it wasn't like this brute force hardware play and it was like this entire inference pipeline was optimized, I think it's a really good scenario to look through as a builder. Okay.
So important from Ben. Amanda, since you're deeply technical as well, what did you think?
Yeah, so I loved all the points Ben made, so he can be convincing in that respect. But I think for me, it's still a little more optional, only because to that point, as far as the typical leader, I don't know how technical they really want to go. But I do agree. I think it's a nice use case. But for me, it still felt a little product-y, so I was still on, I think, the optional camp on this one.
Okay, so I'm also was on the optional. John, Paul, agree?
And let me make the case for important. I think Ben, you put it beautifully. I mean, there's some other things we have to keep in mind here. First, Rufus is huge. Amazon is a dominant player. I mean, how they're solving this on their biggest day is something that an AI leader should understand. Second, Ben, you raised something which I hadn't thought of till you were talking about it, which is this notion of multi-layer intelligence, if you will, and depending upon how you think about that other attention head, vertically or horizontally or diagonally or what, conceptually. But, I was thinking about, I can go back and, look at some stuff. In a weird way, I wonder if that's going to a more of a brain architecture, right? When we have when you think of, like just the intricacy of how neurons activate each other and so forth, that this notion of anticipatory context across time, if you will, if you want to think of it that way. So we're building this kind of probabilistic anticipatory context about time. We're having a theory where we're in time 1, what time 2 is going to be, right? And then checking time 2 before it's enacted with another semantic, shot. And that general insight, and to be able to do it at scale. I mean, Amazon on Prime Day. I mean, that's pretty important, I think, to understand. So I might even go essential, but that, for me, definitely important.
Yeah. John, and just to iterate that here, part of what this is also moving, continue seeing them move that business logic out of kind of traditional deterministic hard rules closer to where the action are. When do I spin up another server? And having kind of a digital AI intelligence is a really good point you're making.
Okay, so you got me convinced, John and Ben. I'm on the important side. So let's mark it as important. And we have 2 essentials, 1 important, and 3 optionals today. Thank you very much, everybody, for commenting. Ashish, Calvin, Vivek, Ben, thank you for joining. This is a great discussion. Really appreciate it. And see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Ben, thanks for joining. Fantastic.